After her mother dies, 12-year-old Clara follows her final warning and spends the next 10 years pretending to be blind so no one in the brutal Silverfang wolf territory will see her as valuable enough to claim. By acting helpless, she avoids becoming a target while secretly observing everything around her, learning the pack's politics and protecting the inheritance her mother left behind. Her carefully built disguise is threatened when Alpha King Caleb arrives to investigate unrest among the northern packs. Unlike everyone else, Caleb notices inconsistencies in her behavior, uncovers her secret, and confronts her in private, but instead of exposing her, he keeps her secret and appoints her as his personal attendant. As they spend time together, Caleb comes to admire Clara's intelligence, courage, and deep understanding of people, while Clara slowly lowers the emotional walls she has maintained for a decade. Their growing bond is tested by jealous pack members, an ambitious wolf named Dennis who tries to claim Clara for her inheritance, and Mira, a gifted envoy who subtly manipulates emotions to drive Caleb and Clara apart. Despite these obstacles, Caleb realizes his feelings are genuine and publicly exposes Mira's manipulation before stopping Dennis's formal claim during the pack's sacred full moon gathering. In front of the entire territory, Caleb declares his prior claim as Clara's true mate, kisses her, and awakens their fated mate bond, proving she was never a prize to be owned, but the woman destined to stand beside him. After the ceremony, Dennis withdraws his petition, Mira is disgraced and sent away, and Caleb asks Clara to leave the Silverfang territory with him as his equal rather than his servant. No longer hiding from the world, Clara chooses to claim her late mother's inheritance without fear, accepts her future with Caleb, and finally embraces a life where she is loved, respected, and truly seen after 10 years spent surviving in the shadows. There is a girl in the Silverfang territory who has not truly looked at anything in 10 years, not because she cannot, but because she chose not to. The moment her mother pressed cold fingers to her cheeks and spoke the last words that would ever matter. They only claim what they can see, Clara, so never, never let them see you. Her mother Claire died 3 days later, fever took her before the moon rose. And Clara, 12 years old, trembling in a wolf territory that devoured softness, buried the last person who had ever loved her and made a decision. She would disappear in plain sight. Not with magic, not with power, with stillness, with performance, with the kind of patience that becomes its own armor over time. She let her eyes go unfocused. She learned to walk slowly, to let her hands trail across walls, to blink too long, or to look just past faces rather than into them. She practiced the art of missing things, dropping cups, tripping on flat ground, pausing at turns she already knew by heart. And wolves believed her because wolves trusted what their instincts told them, and every instinct in the Silverfang territory said the girl with the cloudy stare was broken and nothing worth claiming. That is how Clara survived. Not through strength, not through cunning, though she had plenty of it. Through the oldest trick in the world, she made herself into something nobody wanted. But survival and safety are two very different things. And as her 10th year of darkness drew toward its end, something was coming that her performance could not prepare her for. Something that moved like storms move. Not with noise, but with pressure. Something that could see. Well, Chapter 1. Clara knew the great stone hall better than she knew her own heartbeat. She had memorized every crack in the floor, which tiles dipped low enough to catch a careless foot, which torches burned hotter on cold mornings, which pillars were cold to the touch at midday, and which ones held warmth from the fires that burned all night in the inner chambers. She knew everything, she saw everything, she just made sure no one knew that. Morning in the Silverfang territory began before the sun. Wolves rose with the earth, with the damp smell of soil turning with the low fog that rolled off the hills surrounding the clan den. The stone keep, where most of the pack lived, was old ancient. Its walls were thick and dark, carved with the old symbols of wolf bloodlines, moons, and fangs, and the spiraling marks of the moon goddess herself pressed into stone by hands long gone to dust. The territory was not cruel by nature, but it was unforgiving in the way all wolf societies were shaped by law, by rank, by the ancient customs that determined who held power and who did not, who was seen as worthy and who was seen as a liability. In a world like that, weakness was not simply an inconvenience, it was an invitation. Clara moved through those halls the way she always moved, shoulders, soft head, angled downward, eyes tracking the ground at her feet with the slow, careful focus of someone who could not trust what lay ahead. She saw the water basin ahead of her before she reached it. She pretended not to. Her shoulder caught its rim and she stumbled, not far, not dramatically, just enough to make the sound of splashing echo through the quiet morning corridor. Clara careful. A warm hand caught her elbow before she could go sideways, and Clara let herself be pulled upright with the small, relieved exhale of a girl who had needed saving. It was Gracie. It was always Gracie. Gracie, whose hands were gentle and whose heart was the kind that wolves with power tended to overlook. She guided Clara the rest of the way down the corridor without being asked, one hand loosely at Clara's elbow, steering her around corners. She did not need help with speaking in a low and easy voice about the morning duties, about which elders had requested warm broth, about which fires needed restocking, about which mid-ranked wolves had returned from a border patrol the previous evening looking muddy and unsatisfied. Clara listened, she absorbed every word, and she tucked away the details Gracie didn't even realize she was sharing, that Elder Marcus had slept poorly, that the Beta's inner circle was restless, that 2 of the outer scouts had returned with injuries from the northern border. Information. All of it useful. All of it freely given because nobody guarded their words around the girl who could not see. That was the real gift of pretending at blindness. Not what Clara hid from the world, but what the world revealed to her. "Dennis was asking about you again," Gracie murmured as they passed into the kitchen corridor. Her voice was careful quiet in a way that meant something. Clara kept her face blank, soft, a little confused, as though she was still orienting herself to the space. But inside, cold. Dennis was one of the pack's stronger mid-ranking wolves, not an alpha but powerful enough, not cruel by nature but opportunistic in the way that many wolves in their society were. He circled the unmated females with calculating patience, weighing assets against usefulness, considering which union would benefit him most. He had noticed Clara twice already, both times she had stumbled away from him with such convincing helplessness that he had lost interest. But twice becoming 3 times was a pattern, and patterns became problems. "What did he want?" Clara murmured. Keeping her voice small, he was asking Elder Mara whether the moon goddess considers a female unmated if she cannot serve as a proper mate, whether someone with limitations could still be formally claimed. The cold deepened. Clara understood perfectly what that meant. Dennis was not interested in her, and he was interested in what she possessed. Her mother's old bloodline, the small parcel of territory that technically passed to Clara on Claire's death, and which Clara had never formally claimed because claiming it would require stepping forward in ceremony, being seen, being assessed. She had refused it for 10 years. "What did Elder Mara say?" Clara asked. "She said the moon goddess does not require a mate to be whole in body, only in spirit." Clara exhaled just barely. "I see." She did not let Gracie hear the way her pulse quickened. Not because she feared Dennis specifically, but because she feared the system he represented. The clockwork of wolf society which moved relentlessly, which ground through individuals like grain through stone. A society where unmated females above a certain age became available regardless of whether they wished to be mated at all. A society where a man like Dennis could petition an elder and receive a favorable answer simply because tradition allowed it. Clara's performance had bought her 10 years of quiet. She was not certain how many more she had left. Lunch in the Great Hall was its own kind of performance. Clara sat at the lower tables where the Omegas and the servants ate, where no powerful wolf ever looked twice. She ate with careful deliberateness, using both hands to feel the edges of her bowl before dipping her spoon in, occasionally missing the cup she reached for with just enough clumsiness to be convincing. Rebecca sat 3 tables over with a group of females ranked just below the Beta's circle, loud, bright, the kind of beautiful that came with a constant awareness of itself. She laughed too sharply when she looked at Clara. She always laughed too sharply. "Poor little blind thing," Rebecca said once, loud enough to carry. "Can't even see the food she's eating." The table around her laughed. Clara did not react. She kept her eyes on the middle distance, her expression placid, her spoon moving in a slow arc toward her mouth. Inside, she catalogued everything. The slight wobble in Rebecca's laughter that came from insecurity rather than cruelty. The way 3 of her companions joined in and 2 of them didn't, and which 2 of those were. The way the older wolf at the end of that table, a graying female named Agatha, looked at Rebecca with a careful neutrality that wasn't quite disapproval but wasn't far from it. Clara stored every observation, though she did not know when it would matter. She only knew that everything eventually mattered. That evening, the great keep buzzed with something new. Not loud, not announced, but Clara felt it the way she always felt shifts in the territory. Through the bodies around her, through the way wolves who had been easy-moving all afternoon suddenly became tight-shouldered and sharp-eyed. Through the sudden drop in casual conversation and the rise of quick, low murmurs. Through the way Gracie's hand tightened on her elbow without being aware of it. "What is it?" Clara murmured, letting her voice carry just a threat of bewilderment. The right amount for a girl who could not see faces and had to read moods from breath and sound. Gracie's voice, when it came, was almost a breath. "Runners came in from the Eastern Pass an hour ago, and the Alpha King has sent word that he's coming in person." Clara went very still. Only on the inside. Outside, she let her brows furrow. Let her face do the mild confusion of someone trying to understand news they hadn't asked for. "The Alpha King," she repeated. "Caleb," Gracie murmured. "He's coming to investigate the unrest between the northern clans. They say he travels with his inner circle, no ceremony, no warning, just presence, just power." Clara processed it quietly. Caleb. She had heard the name since she was small, everyone had. The Alpha King was not a ceremonial title, it was an earned one. The wolves who held it were those the moon goddess herself had blessed with something beyond ordinary dominance. Something that other wolves felt in their bones before they ever saw the face that carried it. He was said to be ruthless or said to be perceptive, said to see through the things other wolves missed. Clara's stomach turned slow and cold. "They only claim what they can see," her mother's voice said somewhere in her memory. She adjusted her hold on Gracie's arm, let herself look a little lost. But behind her clouded expression, Clara began to think very carefully, and she made herself a promise. Whatever Caleb was, whatever he sensed, whatever gifts the moon goddess had given him, he would not see her, she would not allow it. Chapter 2. He arrived at dusk. The torches in the great entrance hall had been lit early, all of them, even the high ones that required ladders and that the pack only lit for high ceremonies. Their combined light turned the old stone walls amber and made the shadows underneath sharper than usual, more defined, as though the territory itself was trying to look its best. Clara was positioned at the side of the hall, a carved stone column at her back, a clay pot of water in her hands that she was meant to be carrying somewhere. She had chosen the position deliberately peripheral, functional, unremarkable. A girl with a water pot standing quietly where nobody would pay her any attention. She watched through lowered lashes. Caleb entered the way storms entered, not with noise but with pressure. The quality of the air changed when he crossed the threshold. The wolves nearest the entrance shifted not dramatically, not with obvious reaction, but with the small involuntary adjustments of bodies registering dominance. Shoulders turned slightly inward, chest dropped a fraction. Eyes dropped to the middle distance rather than forward. He was not especially tall. Clara noticed that first because she had expected tall from the stories. He was built like a wolf who had earned his body rather than been born into it. Broad through the shoulder, sharp at the jaw, moving with the specific unhurried confidence of something that knew nothing in the room would challenge it. His hair was dark. His coat was plain. No ceremonial markings, no symbols of office, as though the office followed him rather than the other way around, and his eyes moved. That was the thing that sent Clara's attention sharpening. Most dominant wolves scanned a room once and settled. They looked for threats, registered the absence of them, and that was enough. Caleb's eyes moved continuously, not nervously, the opposite of nervously, with the slow, thorough interest of something that was always learning. They swept the high corners, they tracked the side corridors, they catalogued faces not with the assessment of rank, but with something more specific, more personal, as though he was reading each person rather than filing them. His gaze swept the hall, and then it stopped. Clara felt the moment it found her the way she felt heat. Not on her skin, but somewhere underneath it. She kept her eyes at mid-level, directed at nothing, doing the specific unfocused stare she had spent years perfecting. She did not look directly at him, but she felt him looking directly at her. The moment stretched. Then his gaze moved on, and the pressure eased, and Clara exhaled through her nose so slowly it made no sound at all. The pack's alpha, a broad, disilvered wolf named Gareth, greeted Caleb with the proper formal lowering of the chin, the traditional gesture of territory recognition, and led him toward the inner meeting chambers. The entourage followed. Caleb's inner circle was small 4 wolves, all carrying themselves with the controlled ease of those who had nothing to prove. Clara counted them as they passed, noted their positions relative to Caleb, noted the one who walked slightly behind, and to his left, female sharp-eyed, the kind of beautiful that came with danger, and filed that detail away. She moved through the rest of the evening doing what she always did. Listening, learning. The pack spoke freely around her, as they always did. Wolves at the upper tables discussed Caleb's reputation in quick, tense murmurs. He had settled 3 border disputes in the past moon cycle. He had removed 2 alpha titles not by fighting himself, but by presenting evidence of corruption so thorough that the clan councils had stripped the titles without bloodshed. He was said to have an instinct for deception that made experienced liars sweat in his presence. Clara kept her water pot very still in her hands. She did not encounter him directly that first evening. She had planned carefully enough to avoid it. Retiring early to her quarters, the small stone room near the back of the servant corridor that she had occupied since Claire's death. Not comfortable, but private. Privacy was worth more than comfort in a wolf territory. She lay on her sleeping mat and stared at the dark ceiling and thought about the way his gaze had stopped on her. Just a pause. Just a breath's length of attention. But it had not felt like the way other wolves looked at her. With the brief, dismissive glance they gave to anything ranked below them, to anything already categorized as harmless, it had felt like recognition. Clara pressed her fingers flat against her sternum where her heartbeat was still slightly faster than usual. He looked at everyone. She told herself, he is cautious, he is thorough, that is all. She mostly believed it. She lay still for a long time and she did not sleep for a long time. And when she finally did, she dreamed of amber torchlight and eyes that moved as though searching for something specific. Morning came cold. Clara moved through her early duties with the same measured, careful rhythm she always used. She trailed her fingers along walls. She hesitated at doorways. She let Gracie guide her across the main courtyard when the pack gathered for the morning address, the daily ritual where the pack alpha or his beta spoke the day's matters aloud, assigned duties, addressed any pressing territory concerns. Caleb stood to the left of Gareth during the address. He did not speak. He observed. Clara stood at the back of the gathered wolves, head slightly bowed, eyes tracking the ground at her feet. She counted seconds. She breathed slowly. She felt the moment his attention found her again. It was not something she could explain precisely. It was a shift in the quality of the space between them. A sharpening of focus the way a room felt different when a candle was turned in a specific direction. She had lived in a wolf territory long enough to know what dominance felt like in the air. This was not quite that. It was more specific, more personal. She forced herself to stay soft, to stay performing. The address ended. Wolves dispersed. Clara turned to follow Gracie. You. The word was not loud, it did not need to be. It carried the weight that command always carries, not through volume, but through certainty. Clara did not look up immediately. She counted 2 full beats long enough for it to be believable that she was determining whether the word was directed at her. Then she turned her face toward the sound, aiming slightly to the left of where he actually stood. The way a person relying only on hearing would aim. The girl Caleb said to the wolf beside him rather than to her directly. Bring her to me before the midday meal. Clara let nothing show on her face. Inside, though, every part of her went quiet and sharp and ready. She was brought to the consultation room, a chamber off the main hall with a long stone table and torch brackets along the walls. Formal enough for meetings, private enough for other things. She counted her steps from the corridor entrance. 16 steps. 1 slight downward grade. Stone floor older than the outer corridor with a seam of rougher material running across it at the 9-step mark. She knew this room. She had cleaned it many times. She entered it now with her head slightly ducked, her hands loose at her sides, her eyes doing the long, slow blink of someone relying on senses other than sight. Caleb was standing when she entered. She felt that. She didn't look. She heard him move a single deliberate step. And then stillness. Sit, he said. She found the chair with her hands sat folded, her hands in her lap. For a moment, nothing. Then she heard him move again, not toward her but to her left, slow, deliberate, the footstep placement of someone who was doing something on purpose. He was testing her. Clara kept her eyes on the wall directly ahead. She kept her breathing even. He moved to her right. She did not track him. He came to stand directly behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of a living body displacing the cool air of the chamber. Close enough that the low, even sound of his breathing was just barely audible. He leaned in, not touching, not quite, and his voice came very near her ear. Tell me, Clara, he said. How does a girl who cannot see know exactly where someone is standing before they make a sound? Clara's pulse threw itself against her ribs. She had moved. Only once, just a fraction, a slight lean of her body away from his voice before she caught herself. Less than a breath of movement, barely measurable, but he had seen it. She felt the exact moment he understood what it meant. She raised her face, she looked at him directly fully. For the first time in 10 years, Clara looked at someone without a wall of performance between them and found Caleb looking back at her with eyes that were steady and sharp and not at all surprised. The silence between them filled the whole stone room. "You are not blind," he said. It was not a question. Clara said nothing. He stepped around the chair until he was in front of her, and he took her chin between his fingers, not roughly, not gently, just with a certainty that made resistance feel beside the point. He tilted her face upward and looked at her eyes, the ones she had been hiding behind for 10 years. "You have been hiding," he said. His thumb moved once, slow pressing briefly against her lower lip before releasing. It was not threatening, it was not innocent either. It was the touch of a wolf who had just found something unexpected and was deciding what to do about it. "Why?" he asked. Clara looked at him for a long, full breath. Then she said, "Because the world is safer when it thinks I have nothing to offer." Chapter 3. He did not expose her. That was the first surprise. He could have, he should have. By any law, Clara knew, or deceiving pack members, deceiving an alpha and an elder council was an offense that carried formal punishment. He had the authority, the evidence, and the audience to make an example of her before the entire Silverfang territory. He kept her secret instead. Clara spent the night after their confrontation seated on the edge of her sleeping mat, turning that choice over in her mind like a stone in a river. Caleb was not a wolf who did things without reason. Everything about him, the deliberate movement, the methodical testing, spoke of a mind that operated with clear purpose. So, what was his purpose in keeping her close? She got her answer the next morning when one of his inner circle came to her quarters and delivered with flat efficiency of someone handling a routine order the news that she had been reassigned. Was effective immediately. She was to serve as Caleb's personal attendant during his stay in the Silverfang territory. Personal attendant. It meant proximity. It meant she would move wherever he moved, stand in whatever rooms he stood in, be present for meetings and meals and the private spaces in between. Clara understood the shape of it. He was not releasing her secret. He was holding it, using it as a leash, keeping her close so he could watch her, keeping her uncertain so she could not plan around him. It was, she admitted quietly to herself, very clever. The first day in his service was a study in restraint. Clara maintained her performance perfectly, walking with the slight hesitation of someone navigating unfamiliar spaces, keeping her eyes unfocused in the presence of others, allowing herself to be directed around furniture and through doorways by the gentle guidance of walls and Caleb's occasional quiet word. Caleb, for his part, said very little. He watched. She felt his gaze the way she felt heat from a fire. Not sharp, but constant, not burning, but present. An awareness she could not set down. He was testing her again, but differently now. He was watching how well she maintained the lie when she knew he knew it was a lie. He was watching for the places she relaxed, the moment her eyes tracked something too quickly or her body moved without the necessary half-second of hesitation that a truly unseeing person would need. Clara gave him nothing. She was very good at this. 10 years good, but he was also very good. And they were, in a way, neither of them spoke aloud in a constant but quiet contest. Him looking for the edges of her performance, her looking for the edges of his intention, they stayed in this delicate balance all through the morning. Through the clan council meeting where Clara stood near the doorway and listened to 3 territorial disputes being laid before Caleb with the earnest aggression of wolves who expected dominance to settle things and found instead a man who asked quiet, precise questions and wrote nothing down but forgot nothing. Through the midday meal, where Clara sat at his left side and placed food carefully by feel-missing cups by small margins, catching herself on table edges. Through the afternoon inspection of the territory's outer markers where she walked 2 steps behind him, through cold open air under a sky going gray with the promise of rain. And she felt the territory's wind against her skin and breathed it in, and she was just barely letting herself exist in the moment rather than managing it. Caleb stopped walking. She nearly walked into him. She caught herself at the last moment, her hand coming up to press flat against his back. His back warm even through the heavy material of his coat. The muscles beneath her palm solid and still as stone. They both held the moment. She withdrew her hand, quickly ducking her head in the performing posture of apology. "Forgive me." He did not speak immediately. She felt him turn slightly, not fully toward her, just a quarter turn. The way a wolf turns when something has caught its senses. "Next time," he said. And his voice carried something she couldn't categorize, or something that sat between observation and amusement. "You don't need to pretend to almost fall." He walked on. Clara stood still for one full breath, then she followed. The real unraveling happened on the 3rd day. Not because Clara made a mistake, because the moon goddess, it seemed, had her own agenda. She had been sent to deliver a document to Caleb in the outer study, a room she had never cleaned, which meant she did not have its floor plan memorized. She entered it with genuine caution, trailing one hand along the wall, counting the space. He was not supposed to be there yet. She had been told he was still in council. He was there, standing at the window, his back to her, looking out at the slope of the forested hills that ringed the territory, in the afternoon light coming through the stone window frame, but his silhouette was clean and still. Clara stopped just inside the doorway. She should have hesitated. She should have done the performance, the slow turn of the head, the uncertain pause of someone trying to determine whether anyone was present. She did not. She looked at him directly, for longer than she should have. She took in the specific way the light fell across his shoulder, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his hands clasped behind his back were looser than the rest of him, the only place he actually relaxed. She stood there and she looked at him, and she forgot, just for that one slice of a moment, to be the girl who couldn't see. He turned, not slowly, not with warning, just turned, and found her looking at him with open, clear, unguarded eyes. The document fell from her hands. She didn't drop it deliberately. It fell because the moment she realized what had happened, the careful arrangement of every muscle she had trained over 10 years went briefly completely offline. She reached for it. He had crossed half the room before she straightened. He stopped very close to her, close enough that Clara had to look up to keep her eyes on his face. And she was still looking at him with her real eyes, not the performance, not the cloud, not the careful misdirection. There was no point now. He had already seen her. Something moved in his expression, something she didn't have words for. Not quite satisfaction, not quite wonder, not quite the hunger she had seen in Dennis's eyes, something more complex, more still. He reached down and picked up the document from the floor, held it out to her. She took it. Their fingers did not touch, but then somehow that was more charged than if they had. "You have been managing this performance for 10 years, he said. On your own?" "Yes," she said, her real voice. "Not performing softness, no one taught you. My mother warned me. The rest I learned." Caleb looked at her for a long time. He walked to the stone table and settled onto its edge, arms crossed. Studying her with the same unhurried attention he gave to territorial disputes and council arguments. "Do you know what I found when I began asking about you?" She waited. "Nothing useful. People said you were quiet kind, that you never caused trouble, that you seemed content." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Content is a word people use for things they have not looked at carefully. Clara did not answer. "You are not content," he said. "You are surviving." The accuracy of it landed somewhere behind her ribs. She kept her face still. "What happens to you when I leave?" he asked. She considered the question carefully. "Dennis Bernard will petition the Elder Council. He believes my mother's bloodline carries something of value. He will want to claim that value. And you would rather I keep your secret than allow that. I would rather," Clara said, "not be claimed at all. By anyone. For any reason." He looked at her with those steady, searching eyes. "Then stay," he said. "As you are, in my service, for as long as I am here." Clara waited. "And in exchange, I don't expose you. Dennis doesn't come near you." And he tilted his head the faintest inclination. "I find out who you actually are." It was not quite a threat. It was not quite a promise. It was something in between that Clara had no safe category for. "All right," she said, and stepped deeper into the room. Chapter 4. Being close to Caleb was nothing like she had expected. She had expected calculation. She had expected the kind of controlled coldness that powerful wolves often wore like armor. Distant, formal, demanding, in the way that things which required nothing personal could still require everything else. Instead, she found a man who was quiet in a way that made space, who asked questions that actually waited for answers, who noticed small things. The way she rubbed her left thumb across her palm when she was thinking, or the particular stillness she went into when she was listening to something most people would miss, and who said nothing about them but tucked them away with the patience of someone building a very specific picture. She was assigned the chamber next to his consultation room. She attended every meeting. She sat through clan negotiations and border discussions. And the careful, politically loaded language of wolves who were trying to hide things from a man who noticed everything. She was useful to him in ways she had not expected to be. And that, too, was unsettling in its own way. Because she noticed things he asked about before he asked. She pointed him with the careful language of a girl maintaining her blindness toward details others had missed. The Betas' slight hesitation when the eastern border was mentioned. The way Elder Mara's breathing changed when grain stores were discussed. Small things, pointed things. After the third time she guided him toward something he could not have seen himself, Caleb looked at her across the stone table in his consultation room and said very quietly, "You have been wasted." Clara did not know what to do with that, so she said nothing. The proximity was not without its complications. She was near him constantly, and near him meant close enough to learn the things that observations from across a room never taught. The particular way he moved fluid in open spaces compact and controlled in tight ones. The sound of him even in silence. The steady rhythm of his breathing. The low occasional sound of something considered and set aside. The warmth he generated, which she became aware of in the way one becomes aware of a fire kept at the same distance for many hours. Not uncomfortable but impossible to ignore. He touched her sometimes, not frequently, not without context, but sometimes. A hand placed flat on her upper back to steer her through a crowd while she maintained her performance. Fingers at her elbow when they moved quickly through the outer corridors, and she was meant to need guidance. Once in the long meeting chamber during a particularly tense council session, his hand had come to rest at her waist from behind, very light, just the pressure of fingers at the curve of her side, steadying her as wolves pressed past on either side of them. It had lasted only as long as the crowding required, but Clara felt the specific warmth of those fingers long after they were gone. Now she felt them at odd hours, in the quiet before sleep, in the cold morning when she was fully alone in her chamber, in the middle of tasks that should have occupied her whole attention. She did not know what to do with that. Others had begun to notice the unusual arrangement. Valerie watched Clara with poorly disguised suspicion. She was one of the female wolves in the upper tier of the Silverfang pack, the kind whose social position depended on being seen at the right side of the right person. The Alpha King's personal attendant, however unusual the choice, was now someone who mattered. And that made Clara someone worth watching. Daniel, a mid-ranked wolf with more physical presence than patience, was more direct. He stopped Clara in the corridor outside the Great Hall one afternoon, repositioning himself in her path the way wolves did when they wanted to feel large. "You should be careful," he said, in the tone of someone giving advice that was actually a warning. "Wolves are talking about why he keeps you so close." Clara stopped, blinked with the slow, patient confusion of someone adjusting to a new voice in an unfamiliar position. "Let them talk," she said mildly. Then she adjusted her direction by half a step, moving around him with the careful navigation of someone who could not see obstacles, and continued down the corridor. She did not look back, but she heard him standing there for a long moment afterward. There was an afternoon when Caleb dismissed his inner circle early and they sat together in the outer study. She at the table with a warming cup between her palms, him at the window in his thinking stance, 2 hands clasped at his back. They had been talking about the northern clans, the unrest that had brought him here, the old territorial argument between 2 bloodlines that had been festering for 3 generations. He had laid out the shape of the problem with the efficient clarity of someone who had already solved it in his head and was checking the solution against spoken words. She had listened. Then she said, "The dispute is not about the land." He turned from the window. It never was, she continued. "The northern clans are arguing about honor, about which bloodline has the right to claim the older heritage. The land is just the language they are using." Caleb was quiet for a long time. "What would you do?" he asked, not testing, now actually asking. Clara turned the warm cup in her hands. "Give them both the heritage formally. Let the moon goddess have 2 lines instead of forcing them to decide which one she favors." She paused. Most problems that look like fights over things are actually fights over being seen. The silence was different now. Fuller. "You understand wolves," he said. "I understand what they hide," Clara said. "It is not the same thing." He crossed the room slowly and settled into the chair across from her. Not the formal position, just a chair close to the table, close to her. He leaned forward, 4 arms resting on the stone surface, and looked at her with the full weight of his attention. "Clara, yes. Stop performing right now while it is only the 2 of us." She met his gaze, her real gaze clear and direct. "I am not performing," she said. "Yes, you are. Your shoulders are still doing it." She became aware that he was right. She let out a long breath, and her shoulders settled, actually settled, losing the practiced softness that she had held in her body for so many years that she had forgotten it was an act. He watched the shift happen. Something in his face moved. "There you are," he said. Just 2 words said quietly in an empty room, Clara felt them land somewhere entirely too important inside her chest. The nights became their own kind of difficult, not because anything happened in them, but because nothing happening felt increasingly loud. She lay in her chamber and knew he was on the other side of the wall 20 feet away in his own space, and the 20 feet felt at once like enough and like nothing at all. She began to understand in those quiet hours that what she had spent 10 years protecting herself from had found her anyway. Not through a claiming, not through a ritual or a petition or any of the formal mechanisms she had been so careful to avoid. Through 20 feet of stone wall, through a pair of hands that had guided her through crowded corridors, through a voice that asked questions that actually waited for answers. She had spent 10 years making herself unseen, and now the thing she feared was not being seen. It was what she wanted to do when she was. Chapter 5. The ritual gathering was held on the 7th night of Caleb's stay. It was a traditional ceremony of the Silverfang territory held every full moon when the pack gathered in the great stone courtyard beneath the open sky to honor the moon goddess, share ritual food, and conduct any formal pack business that required witnesses. Mating announcements, territory transfers, or naming of new bloodline heirs. It was also the kind of event where Clara's precarious position was most exposed. The gathering required visibility, required performance in close quarters with wolves whose instincts were heightened by the full moon, and who were as a result more perceptive, more reactive, and less inclined toward the social courtesies that normally kept scrutiny at a manageable level. Caleb had told her 2 days before the gathering that she was expected to attend in his service openly. People will notice, she had said. People already notice. Better to give them something to see that I control than to leave them imagining things I don't. She had understood the logic. She had not enjoyed it, but she had understood it. The night of the gathering, she dressed carefully in the simple and undecorated clothes of a servant, nothing that drew attention on its own, but clean and well-fitted. She braided her hair back in the fashion that kept it from her face. She wore the performance like a second skin, every movement calibrated. The courtyard was lit with standing torches in a wide ring, their light turning the gathered wolves into silhouettes against the dark. The cold of the night pressed in from the surrounding hills, carrying the smell of pine and ice melt, and the particular wildness of pack-concentrated lunar energy, something Clara had never been fully able to describe but had always been able to feel like static against her skin. She stood at Caleb's left side. Gareth conducted the formal portions of the ceremony, the honoring, the acknowledgement of the moon goddess, the sharing of the ritual cup. It moved at the slow, reverent pace of ceremony, and Clara moved with it, performing her navigation of the space with the practiced care of someone who knew the ritual by sound and memory. Then, midway through the formal portion, Catalina stepped into her path. Catalina was the daughter of one of the senior-ranked families. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to deference, and she had positioned herself deliberately in Clara's direct path as the ritual cup was being passed to Caleb's side of the gathering. The specific angle of her placement was not accidental. She expected Clara to navigate around her awkwardly, to stumble, to look confused. What happened instead was something Caleb had arranged without fully explaining. He had told her 2 hours before the ceremony, "I need you to make a visible error or something that gives the watching wolves a story that keeps them from looking too closely at anything else." What kind of error? Something that inconveniences someone who can afford to be inconvenienced. Clara had understood. She had not asked who. Now moving through the ceremony, she understood who. She turned too far. Her elbow connected with the edge of the ritual wine cup being carried past, and the deep dark liquid splashed in a wide arc across the front of Catalina's formal ceremony robes. The sound Catalina made was not quiet. Neither was the response. The Elder Council convened in less than 3 minutes. Catalina stood before them with her ruined robes and a fury she directed at Clara with the force of someone who had a great deal of practice at directing fury downward. "She is a liability," Catalina said to the elders, not to anyone who would listen. "She has no place in a formal ceremony. This is an embarrassment to the Silverfang gathering." The elder who answered was a graying, heavy-browed wolf named Cassius, who looked at Clara with the expression of a man doing arithmetic. "Punishment is appropriate," he said. The punishment they chose was traditional 10 strikes of the flat-palmed rod administered in the center of the courtyard in full view of the gathered pack. Not savage, not unusual, the kind of consequence that wolf society applied to servants who caused notable disruption to formal proceedings. Clara stood for it. She kept her spine straight and her chin level and her face turned to the middle distance in the performed blankness of someone who could not see the watching faces around her. Each strike landed. She did not flinch. She breathed. She counted not the strikes, but the heartbeats between them, keeping herself inside her own body through the specific discipline of choosing what to pay attention to. She was aware of Caleb. He stood at the edge of the gathered crowd. She could not look at him directly. The performance required otherwise, but she felt his stillness with the same peripheral certainty with which she felt everything he did. He had not stopped it. She had known he would not, because stopping it would have drawn the wrong kind of attention to why he cared, but he had watched every second. When it was done, Cassius dismissed her back to the servant quarters. She walked there without assistance, without hesitation, without letting her stride break. And she did not look at Caleb as she passed him, but she felt just briefly his hand at her elbow, just for a moment, just for the space of a breath before it dropped away. And it was the only contact that had landed on her body all evening that had not been pain. He came to her quarters an hour later. She was seated on the edge of her sleeping mat, her eyes open, breathing slowly through the last of the evening's tension. The door opened. She recognized his footstep and then closed again. He crossed the small room without speaking. She heard him settle onto a low stool near the wall and the quiet sounds of a small pot being set on the stone. Then the quiet of him preparing something. She watched him without hiding it. They were alone. She had stopped performing for him 2 days ago. He came to her with the clay pot and a square of folded cloth. He sat beside her on the edge of the mat, close with the warmth of him immediate, and he began without asking to tend to the marks on her back with the particular careful attention of someone who had done this before. The preparation he had brought was a cooling salve. She could smell it herbal and clean, the kind the pack healers kept. His hands on her back were nothing like the ceremony had been. They were slow. They were deliberate in an entirely different way, not the controlled authority of a dominant wolf exerting command, but something quieter, something that had no name she could find that didn't feel like more than it should be. He worked without speaking for a long while. "You did not flinch," he said finally. "No. Most people do." "I have been preparing for things to hurt for a long time," Clara said. "I have learned to make myself very still inside them." His hands kept moving slow, tracing the cloth across her skin, careful at the edges of every mark. "That should not have been necessary," he said, and the quality of his voice was different from anything she had heard from him before. Still controlled, but underneath the control something compressed and hot, the way embers looked when wind moved over them. "You said it would give them a story," Clara said. "It worked. No one was looking anywhere else. No one was looking at you the way I needed them not to." He paused. "Clara, I am telling you it should not have been necessary. That is not a political statement. That is personal." He stopped himself. She turned her head and found him very close. Now so close that the space between them was not space in any useful sense of the word. It was just the small charged distance between two people who were both very aware of it. His eyes were dark in the low torchlight. His expression was the most unguarded she had seen it. Something open in it, something that had not been calculated or controlled, something that looked, Clara thought, like a decision building toward its own completion. He lifted his hand from the cloth and pressed it to the side of her face slowly with the same deliberateness he put into everything. His palm against her jaw, his thumb at the arc of her cheekbone, his touch so careful it made her very still. She looked at him with her real eyes clear open, entirely unperformed. He leaned in slowly, unhurried, then giving her the entire length of the movement to change course, his lips found hers, not claiming, not dramatic, just present, warm and certain, and very much there, the way everything about him was very much there. Clara let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like much longer than a single evening. Her hand came up almost without her permission and rested against his chest. And she felt his heart beneath her fingers, and it was not slow, and it was not calm, and that somehow was the most honest thing that had happened to her in 10 years. He pulled back, not far, just enough. Looked at her. "I did not plan that," he said. "I know," she said. "Are you—" "I am fine," she said. "I am very much fine." Something crossed his face that was unmistakably not a political calculation. His forehead came to rest against hers, and they sat in the low-lit quiet of her small chamber while the great keep breathed around them, and neither of them spoke for a long while. And neither of them needed to. Chapter 6, Mira arrived on the 9th day. She came with a small retinue from the western clans, formally, with the proper introductions and territorial acknowledgments, presenting herself as a goodwill envoy sent to honor the Alpha King's visit. She was tall and striking, with the kind of presence that wolves felt before they saw something that moved ahead of her like warm water softening things. Clara noticed it immediately. She recognized it from something her mother had warned her about once in the same practical, urgent tone that had told her to guard her sight. Mira was gifted, and her gift was not dominance or strength. No, her gift was influence, the quiet rearranging of emotional states, the subtle nudging of feelings in directions they might not have chosen on their own. Clara kept this recognition behind her eyes and said nothing. She went on performing, she went on serving, she went on being the girl who could not see, who heard everything and remembered all of it. What she watched over the next 2 days was the slow adjustment of Caleb's inner circle. It was not dramatic, it was the same kind of barely perceptible shift that Clara had spent 10 years training herself to detect in wolves who thought no one was paying attention. The sharp-eyed female in Caleb's inner circle became warmer, slower, less precise. The 2 male members smiled more readily, laughed at slightly unexpected times, seemed slightly less watchful than usual. As for Caleb himself, not dramatically but measurably became still less controlled. He spent longer than he normally would in conversations with Mira at the evening meal. He smiled once in a way that Clara had not seen from him before, broader, less considered, not quite like himself. On the second evening of Mira's presence, Clara found a moment when Caleb was briefly alone in the outer corridor between the Great Hall and his consultation room. She fell into step beside him. The Western envoy, she said, keeping her voice low, maintaining the performance of blindness in her body while directing her words precisely. What about her? She has a gift. You should know what kind. Caleb looked at her a quick, sharp glance. Explain. She adjusts feelings, not openly, not forcibly. She makes the people around her feel warmer toward her than they would naturally. She makes them feel that her company is comfortable, that her presence is harmless, that her interests align with theirs. A pause. You are certain, he said. I have been watching her for 2 days, and I have been watching you. Caleb stopped walking. He turned to face her. Something moved behind his eyes, the rapid internal shifting of someone reassessing. I dismissed you, he said. It was not quite an apology and not quite a statement. It sat between both. Yes, Clara said. He looked at her for a long moment. Send word to my inner circle tonight. Tell them to limit contact with her. I will handle the formal situation. Clara nodded. She walked on, though she did not let him see the particular relief that moved through her. The kind that had nothing to do with politics. He did not handle it immediately. And that was where things became complicated. Because Mira's gift, like water, worked best on things already inclined to yield. And Caleb's steady controlled, deliberately guarded, Caleb had an existing opening that Mira's gift found without difficulty. That opening was the thing he felt for Clara, and had not yet fully decided what to do about. Clara watched it happen with a particular uncomfortable clarity. Mira, who had certainly assessed the situation within her first hour in the territory, moved with the specific strategic patience of someone who understood emotional landscapes. She did not pursue Caleb directly. She positioned herself as a contrast, warmer, more accessible, and less complicated. On the 3rd day of her visit, Caleb arrived to the morning meal late, and he sat beside Mira instead of at the head position. And he engaged in the easy, pleasant conversation that Mira curated with the skill of someone who had been practicing it for a long time. Clara sat at the lower position she always occupied, and didn't look at him. She didn't look at him for most of that day. And she noticed with the specific cool detachment she was very good at that not looking at him felt distinctly different from not seeing him. That evening, in her chamber, she sat on the edge of her sleeping mat and examined the feeling the way she examined everything, turning it carefully, looking for its edges, its weight, its honest shape. She was jealous, not because she was afraid of losing an advantage, not because of the political exposure his distraction created for her. She was jealous because she had felt his palm against her jaw in the torchlit quiet of her room. She had felt his heart beat under her fingers, and she had felt for the first time in 10 years like something worth choosing, not claiming, not pursuing for bloodline value, but actually choosing, and she did not want to stop feeling that. She pressed her fingers against her sternum in the dark and breathed. Then she set the feeling down and looked at the more immediate problem. Mira had moved against her. Not obviously, not in a way that could be formally addressed, but Clara began to notice the quality of the spaces she moved through changing. Wolves who had previously ignored her now watched her with a subtle, measuring attention, and Dennis had been seen twice in conversation with Mira's retinue. Rebecca's laughter when directed at Clara in the great hall had gained a sharper edge. Someone was whispering, someone was suggesting things, about the girl who spent all her time in the Alpha King's private rooms. About what exactly an Omega without rank or gift offered someone of his standing. About whether Dennis might have a legitimate claim that should be formally heard before the Alpha King's visit concluded, and she lost her current protection. Clara moved through it all with the still slow performance she had built her survival on. But she was also counting days. Caleb's visit was nearly complete. The clan disputes were moving toward resolution. In 3 days, perhaps 4, he would leave. And when he left, all the Silverfang territory would revert to exactly what it had been before he arrived. Clara lay in her chamber in the small hours of the night and looked at the dark ceiling. She thought about her mother's voice, about the specific shape of the choice she had made at 12 years old in a wolf territory that devoured softness. She thought about a palm against her jaw and a heartbeat under her fingers. And she made a different kind of decision, not the one she had been making for 10 years. Not the one that was only about surviving, a different one, something with edges she could not fully see. Something that required, for the first time in a very long time, that she stop hiding. She went to him. Not the way she was supposed to go to him, not in service, not in the careful performance of her position. No, she went in the quiet hour before dawn when the stone keep was mostly dark and the torches in the outer corridor had burned to coals. And she knocked on the door of his consultation room and waited. He opened it after a moment. He was awake. She had suspected he would be, because she had never seen him sleep carelessly. He looked at her. Really looked. Without the filtered version, without the performance. She was not performing. She was standing in the cold corridor with her braid coming loose and her arms at her sides and her eyes completely clear and completely her own. Mira is moving against me, Clara said. I know, he said. She looked at him steadily. You already know. I became aware of it this evening. He stepped back from the doorway. Come inside. She entered. He closed the door. But they stood in the low light of a single torch, and for a moment neither of them spoke. I allowed her too close, he said. I am aware of that as well. It was not your fault, it was a lapse. Something in his voice was flat with self-directed precision. I had been distracted, the word settled between them, distracted by what Clara asked, though something in her already knew. He looked at her for a long moment. You know by what? He said. Did know. He crossed the space between them, slow and deliberate as he always moved, and stopped just close enough that looking up at him required a slight tilt of her head. His hands came to rest on her shoulders, light and warm. I'm going to address Mira formally tomorrow in front of the council. Whatever she has been arranging will end. And Dennis will not come near you. His voice dropped into something very simple and very final. I will make that clear. Clara breathed. And after you leave, she asked. The question landed in the quiet room like a stone dropped into still water. He did not look away. That he said is what I need you to trust me with. It was not a reassurance, it was not a promise he couldn't keep, it was an honest thing, the kind she had rarely been offered. She looked at him. All right, she said. His hands on her shoulders drew her in slowly until her forehead rested against his chest. His arms closed around her, not dramatically, not urgently, just present. Enclosing the warmth of him solid against the cold she had been carrying for most of the night. She closed her eyes. She let herself be held for the first time in 10 years by something she had not spent 10 years proving she did not need. Chapter 7. The last night of the full moon gathering came with cold wind and a sky so thick with stars that the darkness between them looked deliberate, as though the moon goddess herself had pressed her hands against the heavens and made the dark a frame for something sacred. The formal gathering was larger than the previous ceremonies. It was the closing ritual of the moon cycle, the most sacred and most socially significant event of the month, the one where formal declarations were made and formally witnessed, the one where bonds between wolves were acknowledged before the moon goddess and the pack. Mates were announced at this gathering. New bloodline heirs were declared. The territory agreements were sealed. And, as Clara had known for days, it was also the gathering where Dennis intended to file his formal petition to claim her. Gracie had slipped her that information 2 mornings ago. Pale and tight-voiced, Dennis had spoken to Elder Cassius. Cassius had agreed to hear the petition during the closing ritual when the formal claim would carry the weight of the full moon ceremony behind it. Clara had told Caleb that same morning. He had listened. He had said nothing for a long time. Then, be present at the gathering. Stand in the position I indicate. Do not move from it unless I come to you. What are you going to do? She had asked. He had looked at her. Something I should have done several days ago. The gathering assembled at the moon's highest point, but the entire Silverfang pack filled the great stone courtyard and spilled out through its archways. Elders, ranked wolves, servants, unmated females, children of all ages brought out for the ceremony, their breath rising in small clouds in the cold night air. The torches burned in their standing rings. The smell of cold stone and pine and gathered wolf bodies was heavy in the air. Clara stood in the place Caleb had indicated near the inner ring, 3 positions to the left of the Elder Council's formal table, close enough to the center to be visible, far enough to need crossing distance to reach. She performed. She stood with her eyes slightly unfocused, her body language careful, her hands loose at her sides. She listened to the ceremony proceed through its opening phases, the honoring, the acknowledgement of the formal cup, and she kept track of everything around her with the same comprehensive awareness she had maintained through 10 years of necessity. Dennis was positioned near the elder table. She registered him by the particular stillness of someone waiting for their moment. Mira was at the outer edges of the gathering where she had been since Caleb's quiet formal address to the council that morning, during which he had named her gift and identified its political misuse in front of Elder Cassius and 2 senior pack representatives. The formal consequence had been swift. Mira's access to private or semi-private spaces was restricted, and her movement within the territory was monitored. She had not responded with anything overtly hostile, but she stood at the gathering's edge with the contained expression of someone who had lost a game she had not expected to lose. Clara breathed slowly. The ceremony moved into its formal declaration phase. Dennis stepped forward. He was well prepared. Clara could see that. He had dressed formally. He had the proper documentation in hand, and he approached Elder Cassius with the confident bearing of a wolf who had done his arithmetic and found the sum in his favor. "I petition to formally address an unclaimed matter," Dennis said, directing his voice to the Elder Council. "The female Clara, daughter of Claire, holds a bloodline inheritance that has remained unclaimed and unmated. I seek to establish a formal claim by right of no." The word came from the center of the gathering, not from the elders, not from Gareth. From Caleb. He walked through the gathered wolves. They parted for him the way water parts for a stone, without hesitation, without decision, simply because he moved with the absolute certainty of something that would not be redirected. And he stopped in the center of the ring. He turned to Dennis. His voice was conversational in tone and absolute in implication. "You are withdrawing your petition," he said. "Now." Dennis's expression set. He was not unintelligent. He could read the room, and the room was very clear, but he was also a wolf with pride and an audience. "By what authority?" Dennis said carefully. "Does the Alpha King intercede in a valid, by the authority?" Caleb said, with the specific stillness that was more absolute than any shouted command of someone who has a prior claim. The gathering went very, very quiet. Even the wind seemed to stop. Prior claim. In wolf tradition, a prior claim was not a petition. It was not a formal document presented to an elder council. It was not a negotiation of bloodline assets and territorial inheritance. A prior claim was personal. Absolute, it was the recognition of a mate bond. The declaration that the moon goddess had already decided and the wolf was simply acknowledging what already existed. Clara stood in her position and felt the world shift around this declaration the way the air shifts before rain. Dennis stepped back. He dipped his chin. Not warmly, not willingly, but with the resignation of a wolf who understood which battles were worth having. He turned and moved back into the gathered crowd, and then Caleb turned. He looked across the gathered wolves directly at Clara. He walked toward her. She did not move. She stood with her hands loose at her sides and looked at him coming toward her across the torchlit courtyard. And she did not perform anything, and she did not hide anything. She looked at him with her real eyes for the entire distance. He stopped in front of her. He reached out and took her face between his hands, both of them, cradling her jaw, tilting her head upward, with a gentleness that was at complete odds with the authority he had just wielded. He looked at her the way she had never been looked at in her entire life. Not as something to be claimed, not as a bloodline or an asset or a burden or a curiosity, as her, specifically, completely. "You hid from this world," he said, low enough that it was almost only for her. Though the gathering was close enough that silence carried, you hid yourself from every want and every reaching hand, from every system that would have used you. His thumbs moved, warm against her cheekbones, just barely. "You were never lost," he said. "I just had to find you." And then he kissed her. Not the careful, questioning touch of their first moment in her chamber. Something different. Something that had the whole weight of a declaration behind it, warm and complete, his hand steady at her face, his mouth certain against hers. Clara felt it move through her like sound through water, not on the surface, but everywhere beneath it, reaching places she had kept sealed and cold for 10 years, flooding them with a warmth that was not just heat. The mate bond ignited. She had heard wolves describe it, in whispered conversation she was not supposed to overhear, in the reverent and half-disbelieving language of those who had experienced it. They said it felt like recognition, like something that had been held in suspension finally allowed to fall, like the moon goddess placing her hand over two hearts simultaneously and pressing them together. Clara felt all of that. She felt the bond pull into existence between them, like a thread of gold drawn taut, not a chain, not a leash, not the kind of connection she had spent her entire life running from, but something altogether different, something that felt to her very great surprise, like freedom, because it had not been forced. It had not been claimed or demanded or petitioned or granted by an elder council. It had been recognized by him, by her, by whatever ancient force moved between wolves who were meant for each other. The gasps from the gathered pack were real. But even Gracie Clara could hear her somewhere in the crowd, made a sound that was half wonder and half relief. The bond deepened between them like a key finding its lock after years of searching. She felt him settle into her awareness, warm and steady, felt his heartbeat echo against her own, felt his presence at the edges of her senses, the way she had felt it all along, but now without barriers, now without the careful distance they had both been maintaining. When he lifted his head, the bond was fully present. She could feel him as clearly as she felt herself. He pressed his forehead to hers. "I have been watching you," he said quietly. "Just for her now." The ceremony and the crowd gone soft and distant around them. "Since the moment I walked into this territory, I could not stop. I did not want to stop." "I know," she said, and for once, she did not follow a statement with a performance. She let herself be seen, fully, completely. She let him see her eyes, the ones that had watched everything for 10 years in silence and secrecy, the ones that had seen more of the world than anyone in this territory had imagined. She let her face be what it was, open and warm, and more than a little overwhelmed in the way that people feel when they finally set down something they have been holding very tightly for a very long time. He saw all of it. She knew because he smiled. Just barely. Just at the corners, the specific smile of someone who has found exactly what they were looking for, and recognizes it on sight. Around them, the gathering came slowly back to itself. The elders exchanged glances. Gareth, to his credit, he simply nodded. The measured acceptance of a pack alpha who understood when something larger than territory politics had just occurred in his courtyard. Dennis had already moved toward the outer edges of the crowd, and Clara did not watch him go. She had no more attention to spare for things that had ceased to matter. The moon goddess's acknowledgement of the bond would come in the formal ceremony, the marking ritual that would take place in the inner sacred chamber before the night was done, conducted by Elder Mira with the ancient words that sealed what had already been spiritually begun. It was tradition, it was law. But what had happened in that courtyard under the open sky in front of every wolf in the Silverfang territory needed no ceremony and required no elder's blessing. It had simply been true, and now it was visible. The dawn came slowly, the way it did in the old wolf territories, not with alarm or announcement, but with a gradual deepening of the light, a warming of the stone walls. A shift in the cold air from night sharp to morning soft. Clara sat on the broad stone ledge of the outer window in Caleb's study. Not performing, not hiding. Her legs folded beneath her, her spine straight, her hands loose in her lap. The hills in front of her were still half dark, the forested slopes just beginning to take on color as the sky moved from deep blue to the earliest gray of morning. She could feel him in the room behind her, not because she heard him. He moved quietly, and she knew that now as a personal fact rather than an observation. She felt him through the bond, which had settled into a warm, low constant the way embers settled after a fire had burned through its first great rush. He settled beside her on the ledge. Close, his shoulder touching hers. His long legs extended alongside hers into the cool morning air. For a while they simply sat. The light continued to build. The hills came into color, deep green, then warmer green. Then the particular golden wash of early morning that made the old wolf territories look like something from the sacred moon goddess texts. "The petition Dennis filed has been formally withdrawn from the records," Caleb said. "Elder Cassius confirmed it before the gathering concluded. There will be no further legal mechanism through which he can approach you, and Mira's retinue departing today, she has been formally noted in the council record. Other territories will be informed. He paused. No, she underestimated you. She didn't know what I was, Clara said. Very few people did. Only one person figured it out. She felt more than heard him exhale. Something quiet moved through the bond. Warmth, a kind of satisfaction that was deeply personal, not political. What happens now? Clara asked. It was the question she had been holding since the marking. The practical structural question of what a mate bond meant for a girl who had spent 10 years being a servant in a territory that was not her own, and a king who governed all of them. You come with me, he said. It was said with the same quiet certainty he brought to everything. But underneath it, she felt the careful restraint of someone who is offering rather than assuming, not as a servant, not as a subject. As my mate. Mate, if that is your choice. Clara looked at the hills, the light on them, the way the morning was making the familiar territory look different. Not worse, not better, just different. The way everything looked different through eyes that were no longer hiding. It is my choice, she said. She felt the warmth in the bond deepen at her words. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, just a deepening, like a fire after fresh wood. There is also the matter of your mother's bloodline, Caleb said. The territory inheritance she left you, it has been unclaimed for 10 years. I know. You could claim it now. You have standing, the bond gives you protection, Dennis can no longer contest it. He looked at her. Or you could release it back to the territory, the choice belongs entirely to you. Clara thought about it, about what her mother had given her. Not just the warning about staying safe, but the bloodline itself, the old inheritance that had made her a target, and that she had refused to touch because touching it meant stepping forward and being seen. I will claim it, she said. Yes, my mother kept it for me. She would not have wanted me to release it from fear. She paused. I am finished doing things from fear. Caleb looked at her. Something moved in his face, a particular kind of recognition, the kind that comes from seeing someone step fully into themselves. Good, he said simply. He reached over and took her hand from her lap, settling it beneath his own, not gripping it down, just covering it, his palm warm and steady over her knuckles. She turned her hand so their fingers interleaved. So they sat like that as the morning finished arriving, the hills going full gold. The territory waking around them, the sounds of the Silverfang pack beginning their day drifting up through the stone corridors below. Ordinary sounds, morning sounds, the sounds of a world that did not yet know it had changed. But it had changed. 10 years of silence, 10 years of seeing everything and being seen by no one. 10 years of building a survival out of absence and performance. And the small necessary courage of staying quiet long enough to remain free. All of it had led here, to a window ledge, to a morning, to a hand interleaved with hers, to being at last found. And in the great stone records of the wolf territories in the old books kept by the elder councils where mating bonds were noted with the ink of ceremony and the seal of the moon goddess's acknowledgement, a new entry was made that morning. 2 names, 1 bond, 1 marking, witnessed by the full moon, recognized by ancient law, chosen, not by petition, not by claim. Not by anything that could be filed or argued or taken, but by the oldest force in the wolf world, not something that had been imposed upon Clara, but something that had always been waiting for her. Because some bonds are not chosen, they are recognized. And when the right wolf finds you, not the one who wants what you carry, not the one who sees your value in terms of what you can offer a bloodline or a territory, but the one who looks at you plainly and directly, and knows you. Even 10 years of darkness cannot keep that at bay. Even the most practiced performance in the world eventually ends. And when it does, when the lie falls and the eyes open and you stand in the middle of a torchlit courtyard with someone's hands at your face and a bond pulling itself awake in your chest, you realize that you were never hiding from love. You were keeping yourself safe until someone worth found you.